previous videos, we talked about an example of assignment. It was mentioned that the expectations and requirements of the assignment needs to be clearly spelled out to the students. If possible, we will need to provide the students with the assessment rubrics. Make clear to the students the criteria that makes a good assignment. Now, what is a rubrics? We're going to discuss about this in this video. The rubrics is a criteria-based scoring guideline which is used to evaluate the student's performance, and it is normally used for the assignment, and it should be given to the students together with the assignment handouts. Now, why do we need the rubrics? It provides guidelines for the lecturer to grade the students based on the performance criteria as indicated in the rubrics, which at the same time, this guideline is made transparent to the students, made known to the students. These are the performance criteria that the students shall be graded upon, so that the students can prepare accordingly in order to score well in the assignment. That means this guideline shall be known by both parties, the lecturers and the students. Students need the guideline to know how they can score, while the lecturer needs the guideline to grade the students based on their performance. Now, probably the next question here will be, when do we use the rubrics? The rubrics is used as an objective measure to rate something which is subjective in nature. Let's say now you are doing the progress test or examinations. We can explicitly define how many marks that students manage to score. If the students provide the correct answers, students should be given the relevant marks. If the students do not provide the correct answers, no marks should be given. Now, for the tests and examinations, the measurements and the assessment can be done in a very clear-cut manner. Right answer with marks, wrong answer without marks. Under these circumstances, no rubrics will be required. However, there are some assessments where the assign of the mark cannot be as clear-cut as it is in the test and examination. Let's say now you need to rate the proficiency of the students conducting an experiment. Now, how do you define the level of proficiency and how many marks should be given to the students based on the level of proficiency demonstrated by the students? This is especially important when you have more than one assessor. Different persons may have different expectations and requirements in terms of the level of proficiency. One person may be satisfied with the performance of the students, while another may feel that the students still not meeting the requirement. There is some degree of inconsistency in terms of the level of acceptance. Because of this, we will need some measures to make this rating output to be consistent, so that different assessors will end up more or less similar rating output. This brings to the needs of the rubrics. As the rubrics systematically outline the scope of the assessment, it also specifies the expectations of the instructor, explicitly describe the level of quality, and also list the performance criteria. And when all this being standardized, whoever rate the students based on the guideline will end up to be more or less consistent rating output. This is the functions of the rubrics. To make it simple, whichever assessment that is not objective in nature will require rubrics. This is to ensure the consistency among different assessors when it comes to the rating of the performance of the students. And then these assessment rubrics will need to be made transparent to the students, so that the students are also aware of the expectations and how they can score well for their works. This is to minimize the arguments and the ambiguities. One more thing about rubrics. All this needs to be presented systematically, and the descriptions needs to be explicit based on certain indicators or observations. One can tell the levels of qualities, and based on different levels of quality, marks shall be awarded. Knowing the principles of the rubrics, let us have a look on an example of rubrics. This is a typical rubrics. There are 3 criteria here in total. The criteria define the scope of the assessment. There are 4 levels of quality, from level 1 to level 4. Level 1 represents the lowest level of quality as far as this rubric is concerned, whereas level 4 it will be the highest level of performance. There are descriptions for different levels of different criteria. These are the performance criteria. The performance criteria will clearly outline the characteristics that qualifies the different levels of qualities, and the highest levels of the quality will set the expectations of the instructor. Based on different levels of quality as demonstrated by the students, marks shall be awarded. This represents the simplest form of the rubrics. A more advanced form of the rubrics will have an additional level of quality representing 0. Having the 0 as another levels of quality allow the assessor to rate the students 0 if the performance of the students really very bad. Sometimes some weightage may be applied. This is especially when the contributions of different criteria are not equal. In this case here, there is no weightage. That means if the students score the highest for all the 3 criteria here, the students will be able to acquire all 12 marks. And the weightage of each criteria, it will be the same. Sometimes, if the lecturer feels that certain criteria is more important over the others, weightage may be applied so that the relevant levels of quality may be multiplied with the weightage. And then for the criteria with higher weightage, the total marks carried by the respective criteria shall be relatively larger than the others. Now that you know the typical components of the rubrics, there are criteria which specify the scope of assessment. There are various levels of qualities. Different levels of qualities have their own descriptions, which is known as the performance criteria. The description here shall vary among different levels of qualities. And then, the highest levels of quality shall represent the ultimate expectations by the instructor. When you produce the descriptions for different levels of quality, make sure you write it objectively. Make it easy to differentiate between different levels of qualities. Now let us talk about how do you produce the descriptions for different levels of qualities. Taking this as an example, let us look into it one by one. Normally, we start with the ultimate expectations from the students, which in this case, routinely provide useful idea in the group and in class discussions, a definite leader who contributes a lot of effort. This is about contributions of the students in the group. So if you observe the characteristic, you will find the word routinely, leader, and a lot of effort. And then probably you go for the lowest levels of quality, referring to the similar thing. Now it is rarely provide useful idea in the group and in classroom discussions, may refuse to participate. Now the behavior of the students contradicts to the behavior here. They are talking about similar thing, just that the level of behavior changes. You may refer to 1 and 4 here. Instead of routinely now, it becomes rarely. It is specified here, the students function as a leader in the group. Now here, did not mention about the leadership. In terms of the participations, it is stated here, a lot of effort are contributed. As for this one, refuse to participate. That means offering no contributions to the group. And then the following, it would be something in between. You shall use appropriate terminology to reflect different levels of contributions. You are still dealing with similar matters. Now there should be descriptions to differentiate different levels of performance. For example, in this case, sometimes and usually. As the role in the group, function as a satisfactory member, function as a strong member. In terms of the participations, that's what is required. Another one, tries hard. Let us deal with this one by one. You see the terminology here, rarely, sometimes, usually, and routinely. By looking at the term here, we can see the differences in terms of the levels. Since it is not clearly specified, I mean in the measurable manner, but probably we have some ideas. Let's say now if we are talking about routinely, that means most of the time. You can set the standard as more than 80% of the time. That represents a big majority of the time. Now if you are talking about usually, that means it is also within the majority, slightly inferior than routinely. So if you really want to quantify this, you may take this as 50% to 80% of the time. Or you may consider this to be equal. That means 75% onward, 50 to 75%. And then when come to sometime, it is less than half. That's why it is known as sometime. But it is more than rarely. You can take this as 25% to 50% of the time. As for rarely, that means it will be less than 25%. In terms of the roles here, now the poor performance means that not functioning as a member at all. Slightly better, function as a satisfactory member. Higher up, it becomes the core member. Now the best performer shall be the leader of the groups. In terms of the participation, refuse to participate. Slightly better, that's what is required. By looking at the term here, we know that this member is rather passive, not actively taking the responsibility, but normally will not refuse the task being given to them. This is slightly better than those refuse to participate. Higher up, now the member try hard to contribute, taking the initiative and willing to participate, offer to help, and this will become slightly better than those who are passive. Now the best performer will contribute a lot of effort. What you see here, when we need to construct the rubrics, the rubric itself is multi-dimensional, looking at the performance of the students from various aspects, and then different levels of performance are explicitly outlined. The description needs to be quite clear-cut so that the assessor can rate the performance of the students correctly. The clearer the descriptions, the better. This will ensure the consistency in terms of the rating among different assessors. Since the assessment is subjective in measure, normally the description shall focus on something is observable. It must be something that can be seen by the assessor himself. It should not rely on anything that the students claims, so that it is more closely reflecting the reality. Students may overclaim themselves in order to look good in their performance. Therefore, to be fair to the other students, the description normally will base on what the assessor can observe. Now let us talk about the usage of the rubrics. You use the rubric as the assessment grading, which is subjective in nature. These are the examples of teaching and learning activities or the assessment that require rubrics. For example, project, fieldworks, lab works, presentations, reports and written assignment, practical tests, and etc. And assessing all these are rather subjective. Why is it subjective? It is because there are too many aspects governing the quality of all this. When it is too many, and when come to different assessor, the emphasis given by the assessor over certain performance may differ. This leads to inconsistency. It may also be due to only one assessor, but now when rating different students. Normally this kind of teaching and learning activities are rather open-ended, which allow for the unit response from the students. Because of the unit response of the students, different students may demonstrate their emphasis and performance at different levels very differently. Without proper guidelines in the rubrics, the definitions of good quality may differ when the assessor is assessing different students. Now this leads to inconsistency, which may not be fair to the students. Another important function of the rubric is that it makes transparent the expectations to the students. Theoretically, whichever is not stated in the rubrics shall not be considered. It will identify to the students where under emphasis of the assessment, so that the student pay attention on those. That is the main purpose of the rubrics. Now the next question it will be, do we have standard evaluations criteria for the rubrics? Normally no. The person who designed the teaching and learning activities will define the performance criteria as well as the focus of the assessment. It really needs to depend on the purpose of the assessment itself, as well as the learning that the person who designed the activities intend the students to have. So in another word, when we prepare the rubrics, it is not just for the assessment purposes. It is not as simple as for grading the students' performance only. You can take the rubrics as a mechanism to facilitate the learning of the students. Since this has already been made transparent to the students, so that students pay more attention on the criteria that are being assessed. Let me give you a scenario. Let's say now you are given a course, and this course requires the student to do some projects. Through the project, you will need to identify what you want the students to learn. There are some that you feel not that important, that you would like to pay less emphasis, or there are something that has already been in the culture of the students, since it is already within the students. Normally we will pay less emphasis in assessing those. Therefore, whatever you want the students to learn, you will skew your criteria towards those, so that students pay attention and take note of those and learn accordingly. Now these rubrics become a facilitation tools to stimulate the student learnings towards the emphasis that you would like to draw the attentions of the students. That is another purpose of the rubrics.